Ginge. Ah.
In 1987, Michael Jackson releases the follow-up to Thriller, which is the biggest selling album of all time, with Bad. It had a whopping 8 singles released off the vinyl version and a later extra single released off the CD version, Leave Me Alone. Here's a look at the inner sleeve, the legendary front cover, and also the track listing on the back. As always, I'm joined by a special guest to digest the album track by track. Please like and subscribe to the page for more classic albums and enjoy. I'm pleased to be joined by an old friend of mine, Mr. Colin Fernley himself. Welcome. When did you first get into Michael Jackson? Or should I say, when did he first get into you?
Hello, Mike. Nice to see you on here. Hi.
Yeah.
Even though we spent like most of the morning together, we went out for breakfast, didn't we? And we filmed
it's nothing
a
like
couple
that.
of things.
It's nothing like what you might be thinking.
No. So Michael Jackson for me. When did I get into Michael Jackson, or when did Michael Jackson get into me? 1992. On holiday we went to a family holiday. We went to Florida, and Michael Jackson's Captain EO was at Disneyland. And that was it. After then, very impressionable 7-year-old. Obviously, saw the 3D, 4D version of Captain EO, and obviously went with that. And I think as you grow, you kind of want to learn more, don't you? At that age, you're a bit of a sponge, and you try and pick up what you can. And that was it for me.
Unfortunately, I went to Rill for my holidays in 1992.
Is there anything going on in Rill?
I think everyone's just boarded up these days. I think it's a little bit like Ince, but with a beach. If you're not from Ince, which chances are you're probably not, just Google Ince. Anyway, enough of that. Different podcast. That. Bad. It's got so many different styles. I think it's definitely his first foray into harder stuff, like more heavy rock. But obviously, you still got the funk elements, the pop elements, the R&B elements.
I think we've got to bear in mind as well. This was the follow-up album to Thriller as well. And how do you follow up at the time one of the best-selling albums? Later turned out to be the best-selling album of all time. How do you follow that up? You talk about going to the extremities in terms of musical styles. Rock. Thriller had its beat it, Bad moved on and went that little bit further with Dirty Diana, which is a hard rock record, really. But like you say, you can pick pretty much any single, and they are so diverse between the 8 or 9 singles that you pick off there. Obviously 11 singles in total. I think, was it 8 or 9 that were released?
Yeah, and 8 on the actual album itself, as I'm sure we'll get onto that a bit later on. But I've never been aware of any album that's released that many singles.
I think off the back of that, I think it was the first album that had 5 number ones. I think.
Yeah.
In a row. Consecutively. Yeah. And again, that wasn't. We're talking pop here. It's not kind of your school of rock. I don't think that kind of record was matched again till recently. We're talking in the last 10 years. And for a 1987 album to do that, it's pretty good.
You're saying that, but you're saying that it's not like a rock album like that I'm into as such. But that said, I love playing funk guitar, and there is some amazing funk on here. There's amazing rock sounds as well, but I really like the compressed funk guitar sound, which is kind of. I would imagine that he went straight into the desk, no amplifier, and a desk by its very nature compresses that guitar sound, and then they would have just gone to town on extra compression on the top of that. You just get the most amazing funk sound.
Yeah, Yeah, and again, similar to the previous album, Thriller, using David Williams from that, that kind of clean Jackson's disco type guitar, going into Thriller, previous Off the Wall, but he brought that again into Bad, which was supposed to be, a tough old album. That was the idea, he'd built a name for himself as being this weirdo and all that. This was to kind of give him that tougher image, which is why they moved into obviously that kind of image for him, but still with the the disco aspects. Yeah.
Well, I did read that he wrote 60 songs for this album.
I believe so.
But recorded 30, and he wanted it as a triple album.
Yeah, I mean, when you speak to what you hear of Michael Jackson, you'll speak to the fan base. Michael Jackson had hundreds and hundreds of songs in the vault. This vault that exists, of which he'll have written something in the 70s and picked it up in the 90s, and likewise in the 80s and picked it up again in the 90s. He was a songwriter. He was a songwriter. From the age of 8, something like that. He came onto the scene. He joined the Jackson 5 back when he was, I think it was around 5 years old. So that's all he's kind of known. And that kind of songwriting, it's not a case of going into a studio and making an album. You'll look at previous interviews that he's done, and he'll talk about songs. It's all about the songs and the tapestry that's woven. I take it when Sony came to him about an album, he already had things in the works that he could just polish up, so to speak.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, without further ado then, let's go into track 1, side 1, which I believe was the second single. And it's obviously the eponymous track called Bad.
Yeah.
And I love the layering of the bass on this. It sounds to me like, as with much of the album, that again we'll get onto later on, but it seems to me like they were combining lots of different synth sounds to get the ultimate goal on that. And it's like a kind of a chromatic bass line run up, really.
Yeah, it's a run on bass, but like you say, and it's not specifically Bad. The sonics in Bad, when you consider that it was recorded from about 1985 to 1987, the quality of the sound recording is up there with anything. And again, we can touch on that later. It's not specifically this one song, but when you talk about it, there's so much going on in these songs. They're so simple songs, in terms of it's a bass line, it's chords, it's melody, it's harmonies, it's background vocals. There's not an awful lot going on as you listen to it over the radio, but when you drill down into the song, like you said, the organ sounds, the synth sounds, that you talk about the solo in the organ solo that you hear on that. It's actually 2 separate soloists that's been brought together. A jazz, I think it was a jazz organist. What was his name? Jimmy Smith, I think. It was Jimmy Smith that played the first part of the solo, and then it goes up into Greg Fillingane's, the wow at the end. Greg Fillingane's was, a major part of this synth sound. He worked on Thriller, and then he went, obviously did all the Bad album, and then moved on to touring with Michael for the Bad tour. But he was, pardon the pun, instrumental in that sound and creating that, or helping create that sound for this album.
Well, like you touched on before, when you hear this on radio, you've really got to listen to these songs on headphones to appreciate the almost non-musical sounds that you've got going on. And I think it's very evident on the intro to Bad, is you've actually got a lot of white noise on
that percussive noise, that ticking noise, that that groove that it creates.
I mean,
that kind of stuff.
Exactly, and some of it is actually synth bass pitched so low that you can't actually pick a note out, but you're still getting but it's kind of almost like a drum beat, really, but it is actually a bass just super, super low.
Yeah,
in
and
pitch.
there's a couple of tracks on there that, you know, we know, Bad being the obvious one, but you can throw Speed Demon in there as well. You know, similar kind of setup. I know we'll come on to that.
Well,
But
we
again,
we
it's
we
up
know
there.
very well about that, which we'll get onto in a little bit. But yeah, again, the super compressed guitar sound amazing to me. Who played the majority of the clean sounds on there? Is it one player or?
Yeah, there was session. You know, I think Michael had. I'm referring him to Michael like I know him. You know, I'm a lad from Wigan. I don't know Michael Jackson.
No.
It, Michael had what they refer to as an A and a B team. You know, Quincy's the producer on there. Quincy Jones, obviously jazz instrumentalist, moved up into producing. You know, produced for the likes of Sinatra. You know, he did a few. Well, there were Strong Black records back then. Strong Black records, and it was mainly with that kind of jazz funk feel. He was a jazz guy, but there were still elements of funk and disco. You know, from back when he was working with Rod Temperton and doing all the disco stuff on Off the Wall and moving up into Thriller. But yeah, Quincy was obviously instrumental in producing this record and putting his, you know, his own take on what Michael came to in terms of the demos. And then the next one was the engineer, the sound engineer. No one gets near to Bruce Swedien.
Well,
you talk about the time, you know, you could put this on now and it's up there sonically with anything that comes out these days.
It is. I'd love to hear a 5.1 surround sound mix of this album. I'm sure there probably is one out there somewhere. And if not, I mean,
I know there's a Thriller. There's a Thriller Super Wave. Yeah. I don't think there's a Bad.
Well, it needs to be. It needs to be done because I think this is what was the second best-selling album of all time, or it'll be in the top 5, surely.
Don't know. I don't know where it sits with that. I'm not quite sure it's that high up. You know, with the Eagles and all that.
Of course, yeah, the Eagles. Yeah, I read somewhere that just to finish Bad off, I read somewhere that it was originally intended to be a duet with Prince. Is that right?
I believe so. Yeah, some kind of meeting took place between the two of them. I'm not quite sure if it was at Michael Jackson's house or his parents' house, the one where the whole Jackson clan resided. But yeah, I understand that took place, and it wasn't quite Prince's take, because obviously it was Michael's song. Michael had the lyrics. You know, there was no real change to the lyrics. Your butt is mine. Whether that was, you know, Prince's reason for not quite wanting to go ahead with it. I think the official line, you know, between the you know, the fan base and people that were around Michael at the time was Prince didn't need Michael. Prince was in his own space and he was doing his own thing, you know, completely left of what Michael Jackson was doing. And so he didn't need it. There was a lot of admiration between the two of them, to the point where I think even as late as 2008, Michael obviously died in 2009. I think Michael went to a Prince concert in Vegas. So there was, you know, as much as the tabloids build it up, you know, they were against each other. There was definitely some admiration on both sides on it. But yeah, maybe a duet that should have happened that didn't. Who knows?
Yeah, I'd love to have heard that. I mean, he also recorded with Freddie Mercury as well, didn't he? And has that ever seen the light today? That I don't think it has.
There was a couple of songs, to be fair, and what, you know, they could have been epic. They were only recorded again. They were recorded at Havenhurst, the Jackson family home, and I think it was whilst Queen were touring America. You know, I think they were doing shows at the LA Forum, and they had a spare day, it must have been a spare day because everything was recorded in one session. One demo was There Must Be More to Life Than This. That was shelved for years, and I think only came out eventually after Michael died, or certainly around the time, maybe just before he died. Now, after his death, Queen picked it up and put it on one of the many, you know, greatest hits type albums that they've been rehashing. But they didn't do a very good job of it. So yeah, you know, you can argue. I think Freddie might have recorded it as a solo. There Must Be More to Life Than This. The Michael Jackson version was a demo version, so the vocals aren't all that. You know, it was Freddie playing the piano and Michael singing it. It's got a very strong Freddie Mercury vibe to it, very strong. You can hear it in the tonality, but you know, shame that one didn't happen. Like I said, I'm pretty sure that one, whether it got released as a single or whether it's just been kind of released as part of an album. But I remember Roger Taylor saying he wasn't quite happy with the mix of it, and I can understand where he's coming from. It wasn't quite right. But hey ho. But the other one that the Jacksons kind of took and put on the Victory album, which was the last proper Jacksons album with Michael involved, was State of Shock. Now that could have been a track, and I've seen the Jacksons live, obviously after Michael's passed, and that's an epic live. You know, strong on guitar. I don't know if you know State of Shock.
No.
It's on the Victory album. It might be up your.
I'll check that.
It's basically it's drums, it's guitar, it's a guitar lick, and then it's got some of that funky kind of Jackson's disco type guitar stuff going on in it as well. Yeah. But that again was recorded with Freddie doing. I take it the Jacksons were playing it in that studio. Freddie did some vocals and sang with Michael, and they were kind of bouncing off each other, and you can hear, what could have been a Queen track, what could have been an MJ Jackson's track. But eventually that didn't happen. Timelines move, and the Jacksons ended up finishing the record. They put it on Victory and put it on with Mick Jagger. So interesting take with Mick Jagger. I think there was a little bit of a concern. I've read somewhere, I can't remember where I've read it, but Michael didn't quite take to Mick Jagger's singing. He didn't think he could sing.
Well, he's right, isn't he?
Well, one singer to I don't know.
He's right. All right. Well, let's move on to track number 2, which I believe was the third single, "The Way You Make Me Feel." Now, this to me is, well, obviously it's very, very slow, but it's got so much groove in it.
It's the shuffle.
Yeah, the shuffle groove. Yeah. Yeah.
And the story is with "The Way You Make Me Feel." The concept of it came from Michael's mum Catherine wanting that kind of shuffle in there. She loved the shuffles. She loved that kind of music, clever music, you'd say. Not your simple 4/4. And so she asked him to create a song using a shuffle. And that's exactly what he did. There's other songs on there again that use a similar groove, but nothing as prominent as "The Way You Make Me Feel."
So obviously, with it being the era of the video, the MTV, when you bring out an album and you release 9 singles off the back of it, or 8 to 9 singles, the music videos are very, very important to make for a big selling album if you've got enough singles. What do you remember about the video for this one?
Well, I mean, bearing in mind, what age would he have been at the time when it was released? Around 3, something like that. So didn't remember it first time around, but obviously got into it later in life. As a kind of young, a growing child, into adulthood as well. Iconic videos. You talk about MTV and music video. I think Michael's term was short film. It was all about the short films for each single. Off the back of Thriller as well. MTV was coming through with around the time of Thriller, 82, 83, and they really dropped on each other and used each other to kind of promote what became the best-selling album of all time.
Well, yeah, there wasn't there a big a screening of it on Channel 4. John Landis, the guy who did American Werewolf in London, amongst other films, did the video for Thriller. But who did the video for "The Way You Make Me Feel"?
It was a guy called Joe Pitka, who, all I know, his style was kind of that grainy, at the time, urban street kind of feel. And the understanding is that Michael wanted to bring that, he wanted this tougher image that the album was later going to kind of give him, as tough as Michael Jackson could be. But he opted for Joe Picker because he wanted that kind of urban street roughness to it. I think similar to the Beat It video as well, they actually brought gang members in, even though it's not a gangy type video, and I'm sure the viewers will know it's an iconic video. But they brought these gangsters in to kind of sit on set and look like it was urban, it was street, it was as street as it got back then. I think Joe Picker did The Way You Make Me Feel, and I think he did Dirty Diana as well. Again, we'll come to that, but a similar kind of grainy, not perfect, but a brilliant piece for its time. I think the video as well, as like I said, iconic, I think is the word. Michael in his blue shirt and chasing the girl Tatiana. I think his sister Latoya was in it as well, as one of the broads, one of the girls that maybe not he was chasing, but one of the friends of the girl that he was chasing. But
right, okay.
No, but you talk about, we talk about this album and The Way You Make Me Feel, the whole project, including the short films. So many iconic films. We didn't touch on the bad short film back then, which was Martin Scorsese that recorded it. He was picking top directors to effectively make a music video. That was derogatory to what Michael Jackson was doing, and who are we to look at it in that light? But Joe Picker, Martin Scorsese directing all these videos for this. It wasn't a nothing album. It was a big piece that was aiming to be put out there.
Well, I guess maybe without the actual videos, the album could have sold half of what it sold, but the videos, to propel it to the next level.
Of course it did.
I think it sold 38 million.
Wow.
38 million copies, this album. Well, let's move on to track 3.
Yep.
And this is, as I'm sure you will know, is my favourite track on the album.
And what a track.
And it wasn't released as a single, and it's amazing how many people I will say, "Oh, yes, have you heard the bass line from Speed Demon, Michael Jackson?" Which one's that? I don't know that. People don't know the track. It wasn't a single. It should have been.
Should have been.
It should have replaced another single that we'll talk about a bit later on.
Okay. To be fair, I think by the time it came around to not necessarily releasing it as a single or it being an option for a single, if you remember Moonwalker came out, I think it was the back end of 89 going into 1990 even. By that time, the album promotion was done. He'd released most of the songs as singles on that album. And in Moonwalker, there's a segment for Speed Demon. I don't know, have you seen Moonwalker?
The car chase.
The rabbit and, all that he's doing with that. So it's still got its own short film or its own little segment within Moonwalker. Okay. But never released as a single. Shame really, because that bass line.
Yeah, well, I started learning the bass line, as you'll know, because me and Colin decided that we were going to re-record this, and I think very quickly realised how extremely technical it is. And we will definitely finish it. And as and when I do, I'll edit this video and put the link in, because we're going to do our own music video to it as well. But the bass line, we had a bit of a disagreement on the bass line about, you thought it was on a bass guitar, I thought it was a synth bass.
Yeah.
I think it is a synth bass, but about 4 or 5 different synth bass parts.
I think, well, I believe it was Marlon Brando's son, Mikko Brando. I think either played bass or played percussion, as in drums, or played them both. But I'm sure I'm sure it was a double bass, a double line bass being played, and it would, it sounds like a synth, doesn't it? If you play it, it's not quite in key. It's, again, we talk about those white noises similar to what we spoke about in Bad earlier. There's a lot of white noises in there. It's a sound, but it's not in any kind of key. But again, with that funk aspect, that those guitar licks,
Oh, it works so well. I mean, the guitar actually comes in the second verse,
Mm-hmm.
And it's that very, very typical stabby funk guitar part. But the part just before the solo, which the solo to me reminds me very much of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air music. Actually, I know that was a lot later than Speed Demon.
Well, that kind of sound and that kind of time.
Yeah. Yeah. But the little funk guitar part just before the solo, down, is again, would that be the same guitarist that we discussed earlier?
I would have thought so. How clean it was. I mean, I don't know for sure, but it's David Williams type. It's that funky. He's bringing that cleanness to it. David Williams guitar, rhythm guitar, because he was a rhythm guitarist, and he went on tour with Michael, and who better to bring on tour with you than the session guitarist that done all the Jackson stuff, that moved up with you through Thriller, Bad, that kind of those kind of songs. Very, very prominent. Probably not. I'm bouncing kind of albums again, but you hear David Williams as David Williams, Billie Jean, the Billie Jean, guitar part. Is typical him. It's that muted, clean. It's that kind of sound.
Which is the hardest thing, really, because as many guitarists will know, if they're being honest, you can hide behind a lot of gain and a lot of distortion. But when you're playing those clean, funky bits, you're kind of exposed, really. All the nuances of your playing come through. That, like you say, the percussive attack that you got with a pleck. There's kind of nowhere to hide, really, when you've not got a load of gain and distortion on. So I love that type of guitar playing.
Yeah, and to be fair, you hear him on tour with him. It's exactly the same. It sounds exactly the same way as it did on the record. What a guy.
What about there are a lot of samples on there as well, aren't there? Like car noises and stuff like that.
Speed Demon.
Yeah.
And it's not... Again, not just Speed Demon, it goes on most of the tracks. I think we'll pick it up with Liberian Girl as well, the next track of the album. And again, it's not just one Michael Jackson album, Bad, we're talking about. He was so ahead of his time in terms of sampling and trying to, but this album was made between 85 and 87. Sampling was being done kind of as street music, if you had the tech, of course. But yeah, the motor roars, you go back to The Way You Make Me Feel, what we discussed before. There was a roar in that at the start of the song, car engines, roars, things like that. Plenty going on Speed Demon.
It won't be Jackson's car. He couldn't drive, could he?
Stevie Wonder, who can't drive. Michael Jackson could drive. No,
right.
I think he could drive, but he didn't want to. Well, why would you?
Why have cotton when you can have silk?
There you go.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next track, Liberian Girl, which for a long time I thought was Librarian Girl, obviously.
Okay, as many did, I believe. Liberian Girl. I think that track alone, I think that's something he put down quite quickly. In terms of it was written, the demo was created. And then, literally the A-team just needed to put their kind of spin on it, tart it up. There wasn't much done to it other than, like we said before, the sampling and, adding synths on there that sounded kind of airy and, that kind of African bird sounds, things like that. Just from the intro, there's an awful lot going on there, and they're trying to paint this picture of, is it, can you pigeonhole it as Africa? They're just trying to go for that kind of natural kind of sound.
It was another single as well, but it didn't really do very well. I've got it here that it reached the top 20 in various countries, but yeah, it didn't really do much. Well, it's up against some, Do
you think it's one for the fans?
Songs. I think it is one for the fans. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think even though it was a single, I think it was a deep cut, really.
Yeah, I like Liberian Girl. That's one of my, I've been a fan since 1992. Been in his presence a couple of times. And you talk about Michael Jackson songs. You know, my favorite Michael Jackson song is Billie Jean. Never going to get away from that.
Really?
But up there, Liberian Girl is up there.
So would you? I know we're kind of still on side one, but would you say Liberian Girl is your favorite track on the album?
I think the one that was originally not on the album is, is up there.
Yeah.
And we can get into that later. Leave Me Alone.
We will. Yeah. Well, it is my favourite track on the album, but because it wasn't on the original vinyl, and we are a vinyl zone here, I'm going to go with Speed Demon for myself.
Just Good Friends will probably make it onto most albums that came out at that time, and be a good song, to be fair.
I'm surprised, Colin, because I think it's one of the best songs on the album, actually.
Do you not think it's aged?
Oh, it's very, very 80s.
It's very back end of the 80s. It's almost comical. It's that kind of stuck there. But again, that should have been a single. That should have been Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson duet. That should have hit a home run, and it didn't. It wasn't quite right. And I think, you'll listen to interviews with Quincy Jones and with Bruce Swiddy and the sound engineer. They know it fell short. But that, I think, was trying to get Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder in a studio and create something of the time. Yeah. And at the time, it's up there, but it's not aged well. You said you liked it.
I like it, yeah.
I don't mind it. I'm not going to turn around and say I don't like a Michael Jackson track.
Right.
I just think there's plenty more above that before that's there.
I think I just like the vibe of it. Stevie Wonder, he doesn't sing on it though, does he? He just plays the keyboards. Or does he sing on it?
He sings, yeah.
Which parts does he sing on that?
It's a to and fro duet.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you know, I knew it was on the track. It's not something that I've listened to with headphones on this actual track. Yeah. All right, I'll have to check that out.
Give it a try. I mean, I think the idea was there was maybe a gentleman's agreement between the two of them. I think, and they've worked together before. Obviously, they know each other from Motown, Stevie and Michael. I think Stevie had written a song. Yeah, he wrote "I Can't Help It" on the Off the Wall album. And I know there's a good few covers. If you're on YouTube, there's covers between the two of them, both doing each other's tracks. They were friends. Stevie played at Michael's memorial in 2009. Good friends up until the end, but just good friends, you could say. But the gentleman's agreement, I think, was Stevie would play on one of Michael's songs or sing on one of Michael's songs. Yeah. And Michael would sing on one of Stevie's. Now, I'm not quite sure which album of Stevie's it was off, but he did the track "Get It," which again hasn't aged very well. That's a Stevie Wonder song, and again it's a to and fro-ing kind of duet.
Yeah.
But yeah, "Get It" by Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson. Again, another one. If you stick that in there, give that a listen. But
I've got some homework to do here.
It's another song that's not aged well. It's well and truly stuck in the back end of the 80s.
Okay, well let's flip it. Let's flip it over to side two then. Now it's funny you should say about Just Good Friends being stuck in the 80s, because I would say this is another one that I think is could possibly fall into that category as well, and it's Another Part of Me, which was another single, I believe.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how this one performed. This, when I said to you earlier about 1992 and going to Disneyland and seeing Captain EO for the first time, and that kind of, I had no concept of who Michael Jackson was back then. 7 years old, didn't know him from Adam. Another Part of Me was on Captain EO. There was 2 songs on there. There was, and I think it was released as part of the Captain EO setup at Disneyland around 1985, 6. I think it was 6. We Are Here to Change the World, which was never commercially released. That was just on Captain EO. You could only see that as part of the Captain EO 4D film. And then there was Another Part of Me as the outro. Again, yes, I understand what you're saying about it being kind of the time. I think it by instrumentation, mainly. And if you see Captain EO, there's bootleg versions on YouTube now. Unfortunately, you can't see it at Disneyland because that was the 80s and this is now. But on the bootleg versions, you'll hear a different mix of the song. Very heavy on the bass, a bit more shuffle. That shuffle like you hear in The Way You Make Me Feel. Very prominent in that version of the song.
Yeah.
The version that you hear on the album is very, very clean, very percussive.
Yeah.
But again, maybe it's the instrumentation that lets it down.
So this was probably like one of the first songs that he wrote for this album, then, would you say?
I think that's safe to say. Given that they were working on Captain EO. Again, Captain EO was a Francis Ford Coppola. I think Scorsese was involved in it. I know Spielberg was involved in it. And that they were working on it from 85 to 86. I think I'm pretty sure it was released into Disneyland around 86. And it must have been an earlier song, as was Liberian Girl as well. Banger live.
Yeah,
it's a hell of a banger live. If you get a chance, I think they released one of the Bad concerts a few years back in DVD format, and I think there is a HD version of that song where he's there's a Wembley version and there's a Parc des Princes, Paris, I think, where he's performing it. It's just spectacular. Live vocals, very, very 80s vibe. But if 80s vibes trend, it's the trend now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Listen to it, hear it. Hear Greg Fillinganes on the keyboards. On the synths. It's immense. Turn the volume up and enjoy it.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. All right. Well, we touched on this track a little bit before, but the next track, again, another single. Again, we touched on it before, but he releases 9 singles off an album other than the king of pop. But it's Man in the Mirror, and which we kind of said was ironically the song that was kind of the most cherished song after he passed away. But he actually didn't write it.
He didn't. It was one of Saida Garrett's and Glenn Ballard's, I think. I think Glenn Ballard did the musical side of it. And Saida Garrett, who's recorded her own version, and she's been a backup vocalist on the Dangerous tour for him. She wrote the lyrics to it. And, I think at the time they knew that they had a song. I believe Saida and Glenn submitted it to Quincy. And at that point they knew they had it. Quincy always said it, and if you listen to his interviews, he said, we need an anthem, Thriller didn't have an anthem. It's not got that kind of together song. It's not got that concert version song that, live show that everyone expects from Michael Jackson. With Man in the Mirror, they found it and they knew straight off the bat, and it was just a case of getting it done. Bring in the choir, the Andre Crouch singers, I believe it was. I think Andre Crouch is no longer with us, but the singers that he had, he brought them in to do the choir work on it. It's another epic piece.
Again, you've got to. I think a lot of people will hear it on the radio at let's say a modest volume. It's one you've got to put through a good system on vinyl, good speakers, play it loud. Yep. Probably makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, I think, because the song itself carries a good message, really, that you can be forgiven for thinking that Michael Jackson was very kind of, obviously lived in his own bubble, but the millions that he made, but it's a very, and we know he didn't write it, but it kind of shows the human side to him, I think.
The message that he always tried to portray, I think, and of the time like now as well, whenever something happens in the world and there's turmoil, people move to that song. It resonates. Every possible. It's mad how something like that was written back in 1986, 1987, and it's still so prominent nowadays. The message that it gives. Interestingly, I believe. Obviously, as well as the choir works in there, and this was, we've spoken about it kind of off camera, just as one of our chats, the way they would record songs. I think most of the album was recorded at Westlake Studios, LA. It It was recorded mainly in one room on one stage that was built purposefully for this album. Man in the Mirror. Again, this is the part we've spoken about. When Michael Jackson's recording backing vocals, he'll do his normal take, his normal melody line or whatever, up towards the microphone. His backing vocals, he'll take a step back. He'll do, part of your harmonies. He'll take a further step back and do another harmony. So it sounds like you've got multiple people, in the room.
Yeah.
You've actually got backing vocalists, but they're all the same person. The thing is with the choir, they obviously had a small choir, the Andre Crouch singers. But the way that comes across on that record, they did exactly the same. It was exactly the same principle. You group them in this part of the studio. They sing that part of the harmonies. You move them around the studio and you do different takes. And that's why it sounds so epic. It sounds like you've got, 100 pieces there?
Yeah, it's amazing. Going back to this not being a rock album as such, but the production values are like you say, it just sounds huge, doesn't it? I wouldn't have that kind of idea to, keep the microphones in one place but move around the room to get a different kind of a sound. It's something that's definitely going to have to be tried by me, I think, on future recording projects.
I think that's what comes with when you have, one of the best producers and sound engineers. You're only going to get the best.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next track. Now, before we started this podcast, I said that there's going to be something in this podcast that you're not going to like. I skipped this track because I can't stand it. If I'm being totally honest with you, and I know it was the first single off the album as well. I think they chose this track as the lead single. But yeah, I skip it because it reminds me of something off a love scene off a Disney film or something like that. It's very Walt Disney to me.
Poppy is probably the right way of putting it across. It's quite poppy. I think on the record there was a spoken intro, which may be the version that you skip. When they've done the remasters and the re-releases, there's no spoken intro where he's telling you, he just wants to lay next to you for a while and all that shite. For whatever reason, they took the decision to remove it from later versions of the album. First single, I'm not quite sure the thinking behind releasing this song, whether it's to kind of work the girls up or for me, it's not the strongest single that you would lead with. I would have thought the title track would have been your lead track. But no, they moved with I Just Can't Stop Loving You. And interestingly, though, they did record two other versions of it. They recorded a French version and a Spanish version. I think they only released the Spanish version.
Okay.
I think that was for South American release.
Yeah.
The French version, I don't know what happened to it, but it's out there. It's available. You can hear it.
I'd rather not.
Up to you. You might like that version of it.
You know what though? I can actually see why they've released this as the first single for the album, because it was a bit of a change of direction, a little more hard hitting. They kind of thought, let's release something that's a bit of a nod to maybe something that he could have done with the Jackson 5, maybe, just to get the ball rolling on album sales.
Yeah, possibly.
And then come in with the second single, Bad, hard, and it's like, well, this is where we're at now, kind of thing.
Yeah, just different direction completely. Do you know who the duet's with on that one?
I believe it was planned to be Whitney Houston, was it not?
It was planned to be Whitney Houston, and I think it was the record company that pulled it. Again, I'm not quite sure if it was last minute or not, but I think she was signed to Arista Records, and obviously Mike was on Epic Records. And again, a lot of admiration between the two, friends for years, but just somehow couldn't quite make that happen. Couldn't get that one over the line, but that could have taken it to another level.
Yeah, I mean, it probably would have been Well, I was going to say it probably would have been number 1, but it was number 1, right?
Yep, yep. But again, you know, the first single off an album, which was follow-up to Thriller, you could have put a piece of shit out. It would have been number 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the end, it turned out to be Saida Garrett, again, the writer of
Man in the Mirror. Okay.
Yeah, she was and again, I think she was only young at the time, and probably more known as a songwriter within the musical industry. And then that kind of put her on the map, and then she went on from there. That was kind of the stepping stone. She went on to develop her own career, because I think she was then, off the back of the release of that and the work that she'd done on the album, you know, Man in the Mirror and BVs, you know, all over the album, she was touted to be the backing singer on the Bad Tour, which ran back end of 87 to, I think, January or February 89. So it was just, you know, just short of 2 years. Well,
it's grueling,
something like that.
Absolutely grueling.
She was supposed to be the one of the backing vocalists on the tour, but she went off to pursue that, you know, her career. And in the end, they brought in another unknown singer called Sheryl Crow. And that
really? No way.
Sheryl Crow stepped in where Saida couldn't, you know, do the tour. And then Sheryl Crow, obviously, the Bad Tour was her stepping stone, and she moved up into songwriting, all that goes with that, and her own little career.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did not know that. That's interesting. Yep. Just to go back to Saida, did you say her name was?
Yeah.
I would imagine she could have retired off the back of Man in the Mirror.
I couldn't tell you anything else she's done, other than I Just Can't Stop Loving You. I know she did the Dangerous tour with Michael around 92, 93.
What I mean is, because she wrote Man in the Mirror, that's a retirement ticket right there.
Yeah, of course it is. There's no kind of, where'd you go from that?
She could have retired and opened up her own coffee shop or something.
That's what you're into.
If that's what you're into, yeah.
But I mean, you know, it's easy for people to say, you know, you listen to the interviews of Bruce Swedien and Quincy Jones, Michael to a point, you know, Saida, Glenn, Ballard, who did the music for Man in the Mirror. The interviews say, you know, they knew they had it as soon as it was written. As soon as they heard it, they knew they had it.
Yeah.
But yeah, where'd you go from that?
Well, go on, Colin.
You go on to I Just Can't Stop Loving You.
Yeah, and skip it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go on to the next track. Dirty Diana, another single, another number 1 single. I'm on a subject matter though.
Groupies.
Is it a groupie or is it about sexual predator?
Everyone that's been involved with the song, it was about groupies.
Okay.
It was about groupies. It was about the world, part of the world that Michael grew up in. You know, like I said, he joined the band at 5 years old. He was out on the road at 8 years old. Yeah. From 8 years old, he was with, you know, his brothers, a gang of older lads that, you know, were of a certain age that, you know, even at 8 years old, I'm sure he had people throwing themselves at him. And from then, I mean, there's been another groupie song, but nothing like, you know, Dirty Diana. That kind of is what it is.
I can imagine when Dirty Diana came out, I can imagine it shocked quite a lot of people, actually, especially as it was released as a single, because it's a very seedy song, isn't it? It's very...
And suggestive, provocative.
Yeah. It has that seedy kind of undertone, of course, the heavy guitar parts on it, which we'll talk about in a little while.
Yeah.
But yeah,
a very different direction to what anyone would have thought he'd have gone.
Now, do you know what? Because it was probably like one of the more controversial songs on the album. They could have released that as the first single. Really,
they could have done. They
got it out the way.
Of course they could.
But anyway, it didn't stop people buying it because it got to number 1. Let's talk about the guitar part on there. Obviously, you had Beat It on the previous album, Thriller, which is Steve Lukather out of Toto, I believe, playing the riff part anyway.
Okay.
And Van Halen playing the guitar solo.
Yeah.
Now, although obviously the riff of Beat It is heavy, for me, Dirty Diana is the heaviest Michael Jackson song because the guitar part is slow. It's a slow riff. It's a filthy riff, I think.
Yeah, of course it is. But do you still hear that rhythm of Beat It in there? Dun, 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 dun. It's still in there.
It's still in there, but because it's
as a little homage, or is that all they knew how to play?
Because it's slowed down, though, it just sounds pure filth.
Yeah, yeah. I remember the guy who played the guitar on it, Steve Stevens. Now, you were telling me something earlier. Who's that? Who's Steve Stevens?
He's Billy Idol's guitarist.
Right.
You know,
okay.
Rebel Yell, White Wedding,
right,
that kind of stuff. And I know that live, because he did play on the Bad Tour, didn't he?
I think he only did one concert.
All right.
I think because the Bad Tour was the last tour that Michael did in America, or Northern America rather.
Yeah.
I think he did one of the shows there.
Was that a security issue, that Colin, stopping touring in Northern America, just because of his fame?
I don't think it was security. I think Wacko Jacko got to him.
Right.
And he fucked him off in the nicest possible way. They deserve it for it. There you go. I'm going into my fanboy kind of attitude now.
Yeah, that's fine. That's cool.
You know, he went through a lot of shit, that lad, in his years. You know, he fell, however you say it, he fell out of love with America. You know, he enjoyed traveling over Europe and Africa in particular, South America. He did all that. So I think Steve Stevens did one of the, he's had guests on stage with him, but I'm pretty sure he only did one.
Because live, Steve Stevens is a bit out there really as a guitarist, a wonderful guitarist. But live, one of his gimmicks is he gets like a space gun, and with flashing LEDs, and it makes like laser noises. And what he does is he puts it on the pickup of his guitar, fires it,
right,
and the electromagnetic pickup acts as a microphone, and it comes out the amp. I can kind of hear some of that sound on this Dirty Diana. I don't know whether it's really, really low in the mix. You know, when he does solo, there's something in there, and I think it might be his toy gun, because he likes to pull that out in Billy Idol solos.
Yeah, I didn't know that. No, I know. When they were talking about the recording of Dirty Diana, I think Quincy picked up the phone to Steve and said about coming to play on a Michael Jackson record, and he initially turned it down, then thought about it and said he'd play, but only if Michael was there in the studio. So I get the feeling that what you're hearing on that record is a proper jam session. Bouncing off each other. It's epic. The vocals on it, it's up there with one of the greatest Michael Jackson vocals. When you talk about range on there, and emotion in the song as well. I get the impression that would have been a session to witness.
It's funny you should say that, because one of my favourite bass players of all time is Guy Pratt, and I know he played on Earth Song, which was obviously on a later album. But I've heard him talk about when he came to record it, Michael wasn't in the studio, but he actually was. He was hiding in a cupboard or under a table or something, and whispering to the producer that no, it needs to be a bit more like this. He'd relay it back to Guy.
Right, interesting.
But Jackson was hiding under the table. So I applaud Steve Stevens for doing that, for saying that he would have to be in the studio.
I think, to be fair, I mean, back even when they were recording Bad, he'd had the pinnacle of Thriller, and all that came with that, but he was still only young back in the Thriller days. When Bad was released, he would have been 29, I think. He'd been through the Thriller days. Bad, really, you talk about pinnacles. In terms of pinnacles of fame, this is where Michael was at after the release of Bad. So whilst they were recording it, I think anything goes. He was still, the little Michael Jackson, he had a bit of pull because of what he'd done with Thriller, but he was still,
grounded. grounded.
Yeah. After Bad, all hell broke loose for him.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's have a look at the last track on the vinyl version, which is Smooth Criminal. And obviously, I can't think of Smooth Criminal without thinking of the video.
Okay, again,
which is amazing. But I'm part of the Moonwalker film.
Yeah. Interestingly, going to be the name of the album.
Really?
Yeah, Smooth Criminal. But they thought they wanted that kind of tough, kind of feel to it. They just thought that Smooth Criminal wasn't quite right, with all that was going on, in the black streets of LA and all that was going on back then in terms of murders, knife crime, gun crime, all that. They thought Smooth Criminal was a little bit too down that alley.
Understandable move.
Rescinded and went for Bad, but yeah, Smooth Criminal. And Smooth Criminal, that was after. It was a strong track, and it is a strong track, and it's still a strong track today. Michael Jackson loves Smooth Criminal. It's a brilliant song, but was never initially Smooth Criminal. There's a demo been released, or a different song which later evolved to be Smooth Criminal, one called Al Capone, that I think they released on the 25th anniversary version of Bad.
It's not about the Al Capone takeaway in Henley, is it?
Maybe it is. But it's a different song, but you can hear Smooth Criminal in it. And I think prior to that, I think there was one called Chicago 1945, which was, again, that similar kind of 40s, 50s gangster type, the cinema noir type.
It's very Dick Tracy, I think, the video for it.
Yes, yeah. I think that's exactly what he was going for.
Yeah.
But you talk about the song. It's a typical Michael Jackson song. It's a hell of a bass line. It's percussive, slightly off, slightly syncopated in its drums. You've got chords. You've got it building to, what do they call it? Crescendo. When you get to the chorus and his vocals are up there. He's almost whispering through the verses, and then it works his way up to the chorus, and it's, how high is that?
Well, it's monstrous. Well, talking about the choruses, he's saying, Annie, are you okay? Who is Annie?
Annie, I believe, was have you ever heard of Rhesus Annie?
No.
Rhesus Annie was and they've still got them today. I don't know if they're called Annie or Anne. Rhesus Anne. My mum used to talk about them as she was a nurse. It was a training dummy for resuscitation. You do. So Rhesus Annie, I knew them as Rhesus Annie back when my mum used to tell me when I was a kid, because when she went through the training. And the story is, where they created the demo for Smooth Criminal, because like I said, this was Al Capone prior, but they created the demo in Havenhurst, which was where all the Jackson family lived, before he bought Neverland and all that craziness. They created it in the studio at Havenhurst, and apparently in the corner of the room was a Rhesus Annie dummy.
Ah, right, okay.
It sounds quite comical and quite comic strip, but that's the story. The sound engineers have qualified it. So it would apparently be, as part of your training, Michael Jackson was, trained to resuscitate people. The first thing that you would do was you'd find out whether your patient is okay.
That's interesting. I would imagine most people watching this podcast wouldn't have known that, myself included. So
possibly not, but yeah.
I thank you very much for that.
Yeah, you're more than welcome. So I don't know how many times throughout the song he asks if Annie's okay, but it doesn't sound like she was.
Now, knowing you like I do, I could imagine that you felt physically sick and repulsed by Alien Ant Farm's version of this track.
If you remember, we were at college together when that
I do remember.
Yeah. Wasn't, at that time, it needed a rock version. I think someone had created around the time a rock version of Michael Jackson singing it, and then because Alien Ant Farm got to do it because they performed it. It was the kind of debut single, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was certainly the one that, got top 10 or whatever.
I love it. I think, like you say, it lends itself to be as heavy as it possibly can get.
Yeah.
And I think maybe, obviously, it was a massive hit. possibly another #1 single, was it, Colin?
Smooth Criminal.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I'd say without a doubt. But if you think about it, the whole timeline of the album was released back end of 1987, and then he went on his tour. You know, he did Asia, Europe, Africa, North America, South America. It was a world tour, grueling world tour, as you said before.
Yeah.
And obviously, Smooth Criminal to me was the back end of the release because of Moonwalker came out after the tour finished, and that segment was part of Moonwalker. Well, it was the main part of Moonwalker. You know, the one with the storyline with Joe Pesci. Yeah.
Well, interestingly, sorry, Colin, to interrupt you here, but it got to #7.
Did it?
#7. It's travesty.
But is that? Have you got the release date there? Is that because the album was 2 years old at that point?
More than likely, yeah. Like you said, they released it for the film.
Yeah, I think Moonwalker only came out back end of '89, even 1990, and the album had been out since 1987. And he'd been all around the world with it. I know it only got added to the back end of the tour in terms of the concerts, and there's only Michael Jackson was very heavy on singing with a vocal track, or miming, as we would know. And there's only a couple that you know in the ether where Smooth Criminal has been performed with live vocals.
Right.
Yeah, so that's out there somewhere, probably on YouTube if you look for it. But I know it was added to the back end of the tour. But again, yeah, it's a cracking song. You know, it's up there. It's a typical Michael Jackson song, and Michael Jackson loved the track. You know, he loved the theatre behind it. You know, that again, it's another iconic, say, music video, short film, what he created for that.
Yeah.
And, you know, you talk about, I think that it's got a bit of the moonwalk in there. It's got gangsters, guns, the bit where he crushes the cue ball and blows it in the gangster's face.
The bit where lean. He does the I was going to say the lean, that apparently he had a pole up his pants, didn't he, for that?
I don't know how they did it on camera, because if you watch it, it's quite swift how they do it in the video. I know years later he got a patent for it to do it on stage, where some hooks came up and he stood on the hooks, and that's how they kind of did it. And then the hooks would drop back into the stage. So I'm not quite sure.
I'm sure I saw a documentary on the making of the video, and I'm sure he had like a hydraulic pole, for want of a better description, you know, attached to the floor, kind of at the back of his pants.
Yeah.
And the pole would kind of drop back, and he would tilt himself back, but kind of resting his body against the pole. But obviously his core was keeping him upright. I'm not sure.
No idea.
I'm sure I might have just dreamt that, though.
Like I say, I know how he did it on the patent kind of resolves how he did it on the on tour, on stage.
Yeah.
How they did it in the video, you know, it's Hollywood magic, isn't it? That's that. But interestingly, as part of that music video, and we talk about this album as a complete kind of project, not just the instrumental, not just the visuals, but complete project. Some of the choreographers that he worked with, particularly on Smooth Criminal, Vincent Patterson, who he worked with on pretty much most projects, but he can be seen as one of the backing dancers in the Beat It video. Jeffrey Daniels, he's from Shalimar.
Yeah.
Do you remember Shalimar, the disco?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
It's a night to remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did a bit. He choreographed some of Bad. He's one of the backing dancers in Bad. He was the lad that taught Michael the moonwalk, I believe. Or the backslide, as it was before it was the moonwalk.
Before the film.
Yeah. And then, again, he met one of his long-term collaborators, Lavelle Smith, on the set of Smooth Criminal. He became one of his backing dancers on the video, and later on went on to choreograph most of the kind of group gang kind of choreography later on in Michael's life. But again, you know, when you're talking about projects or albums, this was a complete project in terms of visuals, you know, the work that went on in the background, and the amount of people that were involved in the albums, not just instrumentally, but the visuals as well.
Interesting. Well, I mean, if you had the vinyl version of this, like we do, that's it. That's the last track. But
you click off and you go home.
You do, but if you had the CD version, I'm not sure whether it was on the CD version at the get-go initially, or whether it was on a reissue, but Leave Me Alone.
I think the idea was CDs were obviously quite up and coming at the time.
Yeah.
Back into 1987. It must have been around the time that they released the CD. And I think the idea was to push the CD sales.
Yeah.
Give them an extra track.
Of course.
And it's a track that obviously he's not done an awful lot with it commercially, but it's a track that is Michael Jackson through and through.
Well, if this was on the vinyl version, this track would be my favourite song on the album. I absolutely love this. And again, just for like a lot of his singles, you cannot think of the music video, which I believe was cobbled together pretty much last minute. They were panicking to get the video ready in time for the release of the single, I believe.
Right. Okay. Possibly. I know the obviously at the time it was, well, it is a stop motion type video.
Yeah.
Because of all that's going on, you know, with the dogs and everything. It was a case of, you know, they didn't have computers to do the animations back then. It was a case of people would have to physically cut out, you know, with a scalpel, cut out the images and put them together and, you know, drill it into a camera.
Amazing. The amount of time put in on that is a bit like a Wallace and Gromit type thing where they move it a millimeter and then take another snapshot of it.
Thousands and thousands of frames for the video that were cut and pasted over, you know, other segments. But the song itself, you know, it's interesting. It is quite 80s in a way. Can you kind of can you put another song like it anywhere? Not just a Michael Jackson song. Has anyone released or created a song like that song?
I think the most interesting part for me for the song is the vocal canon. You know, the leave me alone, leave me alone, leave me. You know, the ridiculously high harmonies on there.
Whilst taking a step back, yeah?
Yeah, of course, yeah. But I like how each vocal part the next vocal part overlaps the previous vocal part and just kind of builds. I think that's very clever indeed. And I like the you know, the bass line, and I'm
that
sure
again that again was Greg Fillinganes playing. You know, it's that typical kind of 80s synth. You know, he's moved up and he's worked on loads of kind of jazz stuff and throughout his career. But that is your typical kind of synthy or Michael type synth, slightly away from the norm. You know, I think I've either seen or heard an interview with him where Michael was telling him it's a simple kind of bass, but it's telling him to dig in, you know, dig into it, feel it, get that groove. And it's easy enough to play, but it's hard to get that groove that they've got on that song. It's slightly off.
Yeah, well, speaking about slightly off, there is a very strange guitar part in Leave Me Alone.
Okay.
And it's just the bit that I was talking about, the vocal canon before. It's just the bit before that vocal canon comes in, you know, leave me alone. And the guitar, it kind of does a very strange, right at the top of the neck, what I would call, a lot of guitarists would call an Ernie. And basically what that is you're fretting two notes and you're bending just one of the notes up for it to be in unison with the note that you're fretting, or a unison bend it would be called. And there's a very crazy out of tune Ernie guitar part on the end of that, but it works somehow. Do you know the bit I'm referring to?
I think I do, but interestingly, there is, if you find an extended version of the song, there's a lot more going on in terms of bass line as well. You know, not just synth bass. There's someone on a, you know, what I think is a guitar bass, or bass guitar rather.
Well, they did use synth guitars on this album as well, I've read.
Right.
As well as tangible.
Yeah.
Tangible
but
guitars as well.
There's lots going on. If you hear that extended version, you'll hear more of it.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Well, more homework for me.
There you go. But yeah,
It's
you've got
favourite.
on there, you've got your typical instrumentation of Michael's. You've got your killer bass line, your chords, and you've got those strings as well. He's all about strings, and it's building to that kind of building that crescendo to that chorus that, like you said, the vocals on that chorus will never be made again. You'll never get a song like that in my eyes. And I couldn't name you a song that's similar to it.
Mm. Well, I think that's a great note to end it on, really. If you've not heard the album, you've kind of heard it because you've heard all the singles anyway, which is the majority of the album.
Yep.
But I guess the only way to see us out on this is for you to do us a Michael Jackson noise, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we'll skip
a noise
that one.
Of your choice.
We'll skip that one.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do it for you. So thank you very much for joining me, Colin. It's been
welcome, sir.
Great chatting with you. I found out a lot of info about this album that I didn't know. And I guess the only way to see this one out is with a ow! Not impressed. See you again for episode 6, which is going to be Megadeth, Rust in Peace, from one extreme to the other, but that's how we roll here. Please like and subscribe the page, and yeah, just watch your space for more classic albums.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir.